At the better level, we air seal with the focus of creating a continuous air barrier with alignment to the insulation. This is essentially taking good air sealing strategy and using a checklist tool like the Thermal Enclosure Checklist, commonly referred to as the TEC. It was developed by the Energy Star for Homes program. If you use this checklist, it will help ensure there are no hidden gaps in the air-sealed thermal boundary. One example of this in the TEC is that it prescribes adding a gasket to the top plate, as we see in the photo on the right. You can also use a bead of caulk between the top plate and the sheetrock to seal this common place for air leakage. As the top plate dries out, it shrinks and often opens a crack, which creates a path for air leakage from the wall to the unconditioned attic, and this gasket or caulk will help prevent this. Other places you'll focus on at the better level using the TEC are behind fireplace surrounds and behind tubs and shower enclosures by adding a rigid material, picture frame sealed with foam or caulk at the edges, to keep a continuous air barrier running next to the insulation. Traditionally, the insulation is open and exposed behind these areas. The air barrier must also be continuous behind soffits, again so that it's touching and protecting the insulated cavity. You also want to make sure you have a continuous air barrier under and behind staircases. On the back side of cathedral ceiling knee walls that face the ventilated attic, these short triangular walls on the top of interior walls are essentially exterior walls dividing inside space from outdoor air and temperatures. Skylight well shafts can be very tricky to create a six-sided air-sealed wall cavity to protect the insulation, particularly when framed in using flat truss members. The typical solution is to use rigid foam insulation as puzzle pieces to fill in these triangles and get the needed R value. The rigid foam is not vulnerable to air infiltration from the attic, so it's a good way to tackle this problem. Alternatively, using tubular daylighting skylights can be an even better way to light a dark space because you can get an air-sealed and insulated type of tubular skylight that provides good light with a smaller area, resulting in less heat loss, and of course no challenge dealing with the shaft air sealing. The TPC will also address the common knee wall problem that we looked at earlier. Blocking will be installed with air sealing around the edges to protect both the floor cavity and the top of the knee wall from any air infiltration. A solid sheeting material is also installed on the back side of the knee wall to create the six-sided box that protects the insulation. If you're currently installing FSK paper in places like behind tubs and fireplace surrounds for fire code, you'll want to cover it with a solid sheet material and picture frame seal around the edges for a robust continuous air barrier that'll last over time. Taking air sealing to the best level, there's a couple different approaches you can take. The first is to add a second air barrier to supplement the first one at the air-sealed drywall. Here we see an example of adding a second air barrier on the exterior by using a specialized tape to seal up all the seams and cracks on the outside of the building. This is the belt and suspenders approach because you seal both sides of the wall. There are some manufactured products like Huber's zip wall system that creates a robust exterior air barrier, as well as a weather-resistive barrier and structural sheathing all in one. It also uses a specialized tape for sealing up the seams. Another example is Henry Blueskin, which is a self-adhering weather-resistive barrier, which also provides exterior air sealing. Many Northwest builders are having good success with liquid-applied weather-resistive barriers to lower their air leakage numbers significantly. These products can fill in all the seams and gaps to protect the walls from liquid water, and this also does a great job at creating a tight exterior air barrier. One key detail when you go with an exterior air barrier is how to tie it into the air barrier at the floor and ceiling planes, in those transition zones we talked about earlier where air leakage often happens. At the foundation, you want to make sure the air barrier connects to the foundation. You can use a liquid applied sealant, air sealing tape, or flexible flashing, basically anything that's capable of adhering to both wood and concrete and is air impermeable. Some products will require a primer to improve that adhesion to the concrete and wood. At the top of the wall, the air barrier needs to round the corner and tie into the ceiling plane to be continuous. One solution is to use a wide strip of the weather-resistive barrier or a similar air barrier product to wrap around the corner. The material apron temporarily hangs down over the inside of the wall and then is tied into the ceiling air barrier after the trusses are installed. But how do you install the trusses without having to cut this air barrier to ribbons for the hurricane clips that secure the truss to the top plate? One of the easiest solutions to this challenge is to use truss screws. Simpson's Strong Drive truss screws or Fasten Master Timberlock wood screws are two examples that can attach trusses or rafters to a double top plate via a screw driven at an angle from beneath the top plates into the trusses or rafters. This code-approved methodology eliminates the need for hurricane clips and avoids a potential air sealing nightmare. Some builders are taking the ceiling plane to the next level by using taped OSB air barriers across the ceiling behind the sheetrock. This OSB air barrier on the ceiling extends over the top plates and ties into the OSB wall sheathing. The corner is air sealed with wide air sealing tape or self-adhered flexible flashing or the WRB material.